The city didn't believe in omens until the day it fell silent. No thunder, no wind, not even the chirp of a bird. Just one man, standing still, eyes wide, lips sealed. And then the ground trembled. By the time they remembered his warning, it was already too late. Windermere was the kind of town where time moved slower than the rest of the world. Nestled between rolling hills and forgotten highways, it was a quiet speck on the map with diners that served coffee all night, kids who roamed free until the streetlights blinked on, and neighbors who never locked their doors. It was the summer of 1984 when the stranger arrived, barefoot, wearing a tattered coat despite the heat, and dragging behind him a wooden staff carved with symbols no one recognized. He didn't speak for 3 days. Just stood at the edge of Main Street, eyes closed, as if listening to something no one else could hear. When he finally did speak, it wasn't with threats or fire. It was a whisper carried on the wind. The storm will not scream when it comes. It will arrive in silence. Most laughed. Others turned away. A few grew uneasy. But as days passed, strange things began to happen. Birds vanished from the sky, radio stations went quiet, and even the breeze that once rustled the cornfields came to a standstill. The town didn't know it yet, but the silence had begun, and it was louder than anything they'd ever known. The stranger called himself Elias, though no one knew if that was truly his name. He took shelter in an abandoned barn at the edge of town, surviving on offerings left by curious children and the kindness of old Mrs. Cartwright, who insisted he reminded her of a dream she once had. He never asked for anything, but he watched. From sunrise to sunset, Elias would walk the town's perimeter with his staff, tracing patterns into the dust, whispering words in a language no one understood. When questioned, he'd respond only with riddles. The earth listens, but the sky remembers. Or you measure time in clocks, I measure it in silence. Some believed he was a wandering preacher. Others said he was mentally unwell. But strange things began happening, too many to ignore. The church bells rang on their own, always at dawn. Dogs refused to bark after midnight. A well on the outskirts of Windermere dried up overnight, and when the townsfolk dug deeper, they found the water had turned black. Sheriff Tate tried to question Elias formally, but the man only placed his hand on the sheriff's chest and whispered, "Even you won't hear it until it's too late." That night, the sheriff's watch stopped at exactly 3:03 a.m., and he woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding, to a soundless room. The local pastor, Reverend Blake, took interest. He invited Elias to speak at the chapel, hoping to calm growing unease. On Sunday morning, Elias stepped onto the pulpit. The pews were filled with skeptical eyes, arms crossed and brows furrowed. Elias looked at the crowd, his voice steady and low. "You think storms arrive with thunder, but the true storm, God's storm, doesn't shout. It listens, it watches, and when silence falls completely, it begins." People muttered, some laughed nervously. But the old church windows began to rattle. No wind, no rain, just vibration, deep and pulsing, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The following days were worse. Radios turned to static no matter the station. The birds that had vanished didn't return. Even the insects usually buzzing in summer were gone. A boy named Danny O'Neill stood in the middle of the baseball field and wept without knowing why. His father, a hardened mechanic, said the air felt wrong, like the moments before a tornado stretched over days. Still, most refused to accept anything was coming. They blamed coincidence, heat, summer madness. They joked Elias would be gone before August, but on the 7th day, silence fell completely. Not a single sound, no wind, no voices, no footstep, not even breath. Time itself seemed frozen. The power grid failed. Watches and clocks stopped. Cars refused to start. Elias stood in the middle of Main Street, his staff buried in the asphalt. His lips didn't move, but his voice echoed in every mind. You must choose what you cannot see. You must trust what you cannot hear. The storm will test the soul of this town. The sky was clear, but the world darkened as if a shadow passed between the earth and the sun. People staggered outside, mouths open in terror, searching for the source of what they could not hear. The silence was pressing, physical, like a weight on their chests. And then, a sound. One single sound, the shattering of glass from the clock tower, as the hands spun wildly backward. From the horizon, a mist rolled in. Not fog, not smoke, but something dense and slow, almost sentient. It crept toward Windermere, swallowing everything in its path, yet making no sound. Elias turned to the townspeople gathered behind him, pale and trembling. "This is not punishment," he said. "This is the pause before renewal, but only those who see without seeing will remain." He lifted his staff and a pulse of light burst from it, spreading over the town in a dome of shimmering blue. As the mist reached the edge of this light, it recoiled, swirling like a beast denied its prey. The silence broke. Children screamed. Adults fell to their knees. And for the first time, the town understood. Elias hadn't come to warn them. He had come to stand between them and something they could never have faced alone. And it was only just beginning. The mist didn't retreat. It circled. It studied. For hours, the dome of blue light shimmered over Windermere like a fragile bubble, humming softly while the mist paced its edge like a predator unwilling to surrender. Families huddled in basements. The old church became a shelter, where Reverend Blake read the Psalms with trembling hands. Elias remained in the center of Main Street, unmoving, eyes closed, lips barely parted in silent communion with something beyond the world. That night, Clara Brighton, a deaf girl of 12, approached Elias. No one noticed her slip away from the chapel. She stood in front of the prophet, held out her hand and signed a single question. "What are you?" Elias opened his eyes, and for the first time he smiled. Not with joy, but with recognition. He reached out and touched Clara's forehead. Instantly, the townspeople felt a vibration, not in their ears, but in their bones. Everyone in Windermere stopped. Mechanic, mother, mayor, child, and turned their eyes to the center of town, where the dome began to pulse in rhythm, with Clara's heartbeat. Clara's eyes turned silver, and then lightning struck, not from the sky but from within the mist itself. Red veins of energy lashed against the dome, trying to crack it. The town trembled. Elias spoke aloud for the final time. "It has chosen a voice." He looked at Clara with something between pride and sorrow. "You are the stillness now. You are the silence that speaks." The mist let out a deafening silence, a paradox that ripped through the air, crumbling rooftops, shattering windows, dropping birds from the sky in mid-flight. But inside the dome, Clara remained standing, untouched, and she sang, a single, perfect note. It wasn't a song of fear or defiance. It was harmony, purity. And as her voice rose, so did the light. The dome expanded outward like a heartbeat of creation, meeting the mist with waves of clarity. The mist resisted. It screamed, bending the air, distorting shapes, clawing at the edge of reality. But the sound of Clara's voice began to unravel it, thread by thread, until the fog turned to golden dust and vanished into the soil. Windermere was silent again, but this time, it was peace. Elias collapsed. His body faded into light before it touched the ground, as if his purpose had ended with Clara's song. The storm never came, not in the way people expected, but it had passed through them, tested them, revealed them, and it left something behind. In the days that followed, Windermere was not the same. People spoke in hushed voices, not from fear, but reverence. The streets, though unchanged in brick and pavement, seemed to carry a different weight beneath their steps. Like the earth remembered something no one could name. Clara never lost her silver eyes. She could hear now, not with ears, but with something deeper. She understood the wind when it brushed the trees. She listened to the quiet in people's hearts. And when she spoke, even the most skeptical paused, because her words came with a weight that didn't belong to a child. No one questioned her. Not anymore. The town rebuilt what had broken. The shattered glass, the collapsed roof of the bakery, the old oak torn in half near the schoolyard. They were patched and mended. But no one touched the circle in the middle of Main Street, where Elias had stood. It remained untouched, ringed in stones and silence, a memorial to the man who said little, and yet warned the world with everything he was. Some say the storm never truly left. It simply changed its form. Others say Windermere was spared because one man dared to be silent, and one girl dared to sing. But those who were there know the truth, that sometimes the greatest warnings are not shouted, but whispered. That the stillness before the strike is not empty. It is full of meaning, of tension, of final chances. And when the world holds its breath, it's not always to brace for impact. Sometimes it's waiting, to listen. There are moments in life when the world becomes unbearably loud, full of noise, opinions, warnings, and predictions. We search for answers in the chaos, believing the loudest voice must be right, the boldest vision must be true. But sometimes truth comes not in thunder but in silence. Elias was not a man of many words. He didn't demand attention. He didn't force belief. But in the moment the sky held its breath and time seemed to still, his silence shouted louder than any sermon could. And Clara, young, gentle Clara, reminded the world that purity of heart is not naivety, but clarity, that the innocence we dismiss might just be the lens through which heaven chooses to speak. In Windermere's story lies a question for each of us. Do we still know how to listen? Not just to voices, but to silence. Not just to facts, but to intuition. Not just to storms, but to the pause that comes before them. Perhaps the next warning won't come wrapped in fire or flood. Perhaps it will come softly, through the still air, through a child's eyes, through the hush before something begins. And the ones who hear it will be the ones who are still enough to listen.
Thank you.